Mr. Arnold, what year did you enter the war?
1942.
Did you volunteer?
I volunteered, yes.
Were you drafted?
No.
You entered war?
21.
Did you want to go?
Yep. Yes. Yes, I did.
Were you excited or scared?
More excited than scared.
What served did you go to? What service did you enter?
I entered the Army Air Forces.
Did you have schooling for your position?
Oh, I had some. Yes, I went to an aviation ground school. And actually, I had a little flying time. Just a few hours.
Where were you stationed?
Many different places, both in the U.S. and overseas. My first station was Fort Niagara, New York, where we got basic training, and we learned Army regulations, Army procedures, and so forth.
What did you eat?
Oh, whatever they gave us. We had, the food was typical Army fare. Ham, beans, powdered eggs, stuff like that.
What color was your uniform?
We had two uniforms, a summer that was khaki and a winter uniform that was, what's the word I'm trying to think of? It was a olive drab type uniform.
Did you receive any medals, and for what?
A few, yes. For things that happened while I was flying in combat.
How long did you serve in the war?
About a little less than 4 years, 3.5 years.
What did you think of the war?
Well, I had a lot of feelings of, it's hard to describe. Seeing people killed. It was tough, that part.
Did you believe the war is justified?
Yes.
Did you use any weapons?
Well, I flew a bomber, so I didn't use weapons except in training. We got training with all types of weapons, but I flew a bomber, which you had no guns that you controlled. We had 10 guns on our airplane, but we had gunners for all of them.
Were you wounded?
No. One of our crew members was killed, our nose gunner on our airplane. Here's the type of plane I'm talking about, where we... Now, I'm getting a little further in this than you wanted to, but we had guns on the front, and on the back, and on the top, and on the bottom, and we had guns, one on each side, too, so our crew did a lot of shooting.
What was the big battle you were in?
I guess it was when we were going to bomb a target in Steyr, Austria. And
what was that? Something Austria? I'm sorry. T-E-Y-R. T-E-Y-R. Well, that's it. Oh, okay.
That was our biggest one. We lost 4 or 5 airplanes out of 36. In another battle, which I just didn't happen to be on, it wasn't my turn, we lost 10 airplanes out of 36. So they were our biggest battles.
Where were you there for D-Day? Or during D-Day?
Yes. Yes, I was there. In Italy for D-Day.
Were you a pilot?
Yes.
What type of plane did you fly?
B-24, Liberator. That type, mostly. Yeah, was in combat.
What type of plane did you fight against?
Fight against?
Yeah.
ME-109s, German, beg pardon? German fighter, and FW-190s, German fighters, and Ju-88s, German fighters.
What is the most memorable part of the war? Memorable?
Memorable?
Road.
Coming home.
What was the most
Descriptive? No. Devastating.
devastating?
The most devastating? Let me think what would be an example of that. The most devastating experience, is
Yeah.
that? Oh, I guess when our nose gunner was killed. He rode here. He was killed on one. He was about 19 years old.
What did you do before the war?
Most immediate thing I did was I worked in a defense plant where we made 20 millimeter aircraft cannons.
Did you have any family members who entered the war?
My brother.
What was his name?
Ted.
Ted?
What did you do after the war?
Well, eventually I went back to my old job at Remington Rand in Elmira, New York, which they made typewriters and adding machines and things like that.
Did you have a family?
Not for a while. Well, I had my brother and sister and my mother.
Outside of the war, did you have fun?
Well, yes. I guess like any typical guy.
Was this the only time you traveled?
Well, after I went to work for IBM, I traveled to Europe and around the United States.
What schooling did you take?
I took up, after the war, I went out to California to Northrop Institute of Technology.
Did you have...
Studied knowing what I was doing when I was flying.
Did schooling help you in the war?
What I had prior to the war did, yes. Especially, I had quite a bit of aviation ground school and a few flying hours, as I mentioned.
Did you have any military service prior to the war?
No.
Did it help at all? Oh.
No. I'm sure it would have. I'm sure it would have.
What were the living conditions?
Well, in the States, our living conditions were generally army barracks, and then over in Italy we lived in tents. These were what they over in Italy they called them pyramidal tents. They would have 4 officers or 6 enlisted men to each tent.
was the weather like?
When we first got there, it snowed, and we didn't even have a tent up at that point. So we had to, it was in the winter when we got there, and so they managed to round up some tents and give to each crew. There was a 10-man crew on these planes, and so they dug us up 2 tents, and the officers in one and the 6 enlisted men in the other. I remember we put the tents up in a field. It was all muddy and miserable.
Where were you when U.S. Navy won victories in the battle at Midway?
Midway, let's see, what? That was an important battle, I remember. I think it was in 40, was that in 42 or 43? I can't remember. Where was I? I was I was still in the Air Force. Make a long answer short.
What bullets did you use
In the plane.
Mostly 50 calibers.
Did you shoot anyone?
No, I didn't shoot anybody myself.
Who was your general?
General Doolittle at one point. And he's the famous general. Did you ever hear General Doolittle by Tokyo? And then my memory fails me because nobody's asked me that question before. Because later we did have some other generals after Doolittle, but he was the first one that I remember.
Okay. Did you lose any good friends?
Yes.
Where were you when Japan bombed Pearl Harbor?
I was back in Pearl Harbor? When that happened, I was in bed. It was Sunday morning. And I'd been out the night before and, did a little cruising around the joints. My mother came in and woke me up and said, Pearl Harbor's been bombed. This was about noon, I think. And I said, where the hell is Pearl Harbor? And I went back to sleep.
Okay, so you were home at the time.
Yeah.
How did you feel about this?
About the bombing of Pearl Harbor. At first I was pretty nonchalant about it, as you can see. But then later in the day, I realized how serious it was. We were going to be a big war.
Did you save anyone?
Oh, I don't know. Depends on how you look at it. I might have saved my crew one day when we got shot up pretty bad, and we were on fire, and I did a few things right so that we were able to get home.
Did you wear a helmet?
Yeah. Ours were called flak helmets.
What was it like?
It was just like a regular Army helmet. Steel helmet. And we only put it on when we were in flak. Do you know what flak is? It's anti-aircraft shells. I should zoom this here. I'd have to get a picture. Most of our targets were protected by anti-aircraft guns that would shoot to maybe 40,000 feet or so, and we only flew about 22 or 23,000, so we were well within their range.
Did they supply enough clothing?
Yes, all except our heated flying boots were always burning out, so and gloves too sometimes. We had some cases of frostbite from that.
Did you sleep a lot?
No, I just normal.
Did you serve in active duty?
Yeah.
For how long?
3.5 years approximately.
What was the economy like after the war?
I suppose there was a lull during the changeover from military production to civilian production, but I think jobs were plentiful, as I recall, after the war. Maybe there was a little lull, but.
Did you start working when the war ended?
Not right away. No, I took about a year's vacation.
Did you get paid in the war?
Paid during the war?
Yeah.
Yes.
Did your bank Did you bank your money or did you spend it?
Oh, I banked a little, I guess. No.
Dan drank his.
Where's that last picture? Oh.
How much did you get?
I think it was about $188 a month, whatever, plus flight pay of 50%.
Were you married before the war?
No.
How many children do you have?
5. 1 girl and 4 boys.
What was your main job in the service?
Pilot. Bomber pilot, mostly.
Who was president at the time?
President Roosevelt. Franklin D. Roosevelt.
Did they do a good job?
I would say so, yes. We won the war.
What did you think of Hitler?
I don't think I could describe my feelings about him. He was a maniac. He got millions of people killed. If I remember right, in World War II, in Europe, there were like, Europe and Asia, about 60 million people killed, as I recall. And that's a lot of people. And most of them were innocent civilians.
Did you remember any major events leading up to the war?
Well, I recall that Japan was importing a lot of steel and oil and strategic supplies from the U.S. And the U.S. government, seeing what the Japanese were trying to do in the Pacific, they cut off all exports to Japan of critical importance.
What actually led us to war?
Well, the direct item that led us to the war was, of course, the bombing of Pearl Harbor.
Who was vice president after the war?
Vice president after the war?
Yeah.
Harry Truman.
Did you have to share your head?
What?
Shave your head, man. Not sure.
Oh, did you have to shave your head? No. Our hair, most everybody kept their hair short, but not shaved.
How many days were you in the same clothes?
Well, we generally, we had normal hygiene, if you want to call it that, when we were in the States. But overseas, the laundry was a little problem. So we probably wore the same clothes for a couple, 3 days.
Who cleaned your clothes? Who cleaned your laundry?
Well, over in Italy, we had an Italian boy that would come and get our clothing and take it home. His mother would wash them.
Did you get sick at all?
No. Never was sick while I was in it, I recall.
Did you catch any disease?
No.
Do you know of anyone who lost their life from a disease?
No, not from disease.
Did you take showers?
Eventually we did get a shower, yes. That was about the last thing I think we got, though. But we did have, they'd give us a couple quarts of water every day. We'd have to do the best we could.
The places that you went, what were they like?
Well, overseas, some of the places were pretty bad as far as, sanitation facilities went. And the people in a lot of places suffered from food shortages and all sorts of problems, disease. But we Americans, we made out okay.
Did each place you went to hot or cold in the climate?
I'll say that again.
Did each place you went, was it hot or cold in the climate?
Most of the places I went were sort of what do we call it? Not really hot or not really cold.
Was it dry or wet?
Both. Sometimes our runways would be muddy and we could just barely get off the ground, and other times it'd be so dusty that we couldn't hardly see the runway.
Would you defend your country again?
I would try, yes.
What did you learn from being in the war?
Well, an awful lot of people, little people, have to pay the consequences of what the government does.
How long did it take Americans to get back to normalcy after the war?
I don't recall it as being very long. It seems as though everybody came back from the war and went to work, and it wasn't that long before things were back to normal, it seemed like.
Did everyone help each other?
For the most part, I'd say yes.
Was food scarce?
Not where I was, but the civilians had certain things rationed, like sugar and flour, I suppose. And, of course, you wouldn't know anything about it. The rationing, there was certain...
I was just looking through the thing here. I know there's one here.
There was food rationing.
Was World War II an expensive war?
Yes, it was. In terms of lives and financial.
How many lives were lost?
Well, I gave a figure a few minutes ago of 60 million people, I believe, were killed in Europe. And more in the Pacific, of course.
Did the war damage a lot of property?
Oh, yes, to say the least.
Was World War I the cause of World War II?
I don't really know. That some people say it was, that World War II was just kind of a hangover from World War I.
What was the date the Japanese dropped a bomb on Pearl Harbor?
December 7th, 1941.
What was the date the war began?
The date the war began?
Yeah.
I think most historians consider it like 1939 when Germany invaded Poland, I believe. They consider that the date.
What date did the war end?
It was about around September 1st, 1945, I believe, the Japanese signed surrender terms, and we had defeated Germany before that.
What exactly was the purpose of the war?
Well, I suppose we had to defend our people and property in the United States and other countries.
Who were your allies?
The British were the closest ones that I recall.
Who were your enemies?
Well, the Germans were the immediate enemy as far as I was concerned, but the Japanese were also our enemies. But my flying combat mission was all in Europe, so I didn't get involved with the Japanese at all.
Did we have enough arsenal?
Yes. Oh, we always had plenty.
Who surrendered in the war?
Who surrendered?
Yes.
The Japs and the Germans.
Who won the war?
Well, I'll try to stay a little closer. Who won the war? I think the Japanese maybe did. Because look at all their automobiles that are on our roads.
Yeah.
Who dropped an atomic bomb on Japan?
United States.
Was there any place else that a bomb was dropped?
No.
In comparison, how was life then compared to life now?
Well, I think that back then people were a little more moral, I think, than they are now. At least judging by television. During that time, people just were a little bit more righteous, I'd say.
Patriotic.
No? Yes, patriotism, that was at a high level during the war.
Are there any stories you would like to share?
Can you think of, I can't think of, here's something I did want to show you. We were talking about flak a little while ago. Here's these are B-17s. They're 4-engine bombers too. They're similar to the ones I flew, except ours was a little faster. But you can see the flak burst. Sometimes when you'd go into a target, the sky would be so black you couldn't even see through it. You'd see an airplane come tumbling down, on fire time to time.
They understand what flak is.
I think I explained flak, right? The anti-aircraft bursts. These are anti-aircraft bursts here. All these black
So the
spots.
pieces of metal would break up and go through your ship.
Yeah, these.
How about the time you came back with 2 engines shut out?
Well, that was. I think I did mention that a little bit, but we were. The Steyr. We mentioned the Steyr mission a little while ago, and that was one of the most exciting ones I was on. But then our group was bombing an oil refinery in Austria. Moosbeerbaum was the name of it. And a bunch of fighters tangled with our group and shot down 10 of our 36 airplanes that we were taking to the target. That was, I think, the most airplanes that our group ever lost. So that kind of overshadowed the Steyr mission, except that I wasn't on that mission, but I knew all the people that went.
Say it again.
What is your fondest memory?
Well, I think really coming home was the fondest memory I have during the war.
What?
Also seeing my brother.
What did you do for fun?
For fun
Yeah.
in the service?
Yeah.
Oh, played some golf in the States. And, swimming, stuff like that.
Okay.
I'll be honest with you.
I'm interviewing Mr. James Hamlin. What year did you enter the war?
Let's see now. I enlisted December of 1942.
Did you volunteer or were you drafted?
I volunteered.
What age were you when you went to war?
I was 17.
Were you excited or scared?
Probably excited, I imagine. So scared, but probably excited.
Did you want to go?
Mm-hmm.
What service did you enter?
Navy.
Did you have schooling for your position?
No, I left. I quit high school. I wasn't doing very well in school at the time, to tell you the truth, because during the wartime, things were different, and I was not doing very, very well. So when I turned 17, the best place for me was to go in the Navy.
Did you have a rank?
Not when I went in, no. I was just what they call an apprentice seaman.
Okay, next question then. What was your rank as you progressed?
Well, as I progressed, and I became what they call a radio man, 3rd class.
Where were you stationed?
Well, I took what was called my Navy boots. They call it the boot camp, B-O-T, boot camp. You know where Sampson is up here, Geneva? Lake Seneca? During the war, there was a huge naval train station on Lake Seneca. And during its inception, the whole time it was there, it put through at least 500,000 men went through that base, training to become sailors. And I went there until, let's see, I took what they call my boot camp there, and then I took some special we all took examinations, and they determined I should become a radio man. I learned to become a radio man. So I stayed in Geneva, or at Sampson camp, until I completed my radio school. And then I left. So now what's next?
Were you stationed in more than one place?
Too much. I don't.
Were you stationed in more than one place?
Well, after I left radio school, I was sent to Connecticut, where I attended another type of communication school. And then I was assigned to a unit in the Navy which not many people know about today. Very, very few people know about it. It was called the United States Naval Armed Guard. And the duty of the Armed Guard were to protect merchant shipping. In other words, Navy sailors were put on board merchant ships to help protect them. Most of the sailors that went on board were gunners mates, people like that manned the guns. I was a radio man, so therefore I was in the communications in the radio room. And I was stationed in a place in New York City called the United States Naval Armed Guard Center on 52nd Street and 1st Avenue, believe it or not. I remember the address in New York City. And now let's see where I go from there. Give me a head up here, right?
Where did you sleep?
Where did I sleep? You mean on board the ship?
Yes.
We slept in bunks. Usually about three. They were called three-tiered high. 1, 2, and 3. I remember my bunk was on the top. Not too much room.
What did you eat?
We ate very, very well. We ate basically the same food that you eat right here.
How was the food?
Good. Couldn't complain.
What color were your uniforms?
Well, we had blue ones. We called dress uniforms. They were blue, and we had other blue uniforms that were called work uniforms. In the summertime, we changed to whites because they were cooler. We were issued all sorts of uniforms.
Did you receive any medals?
Not the United States government. I received a medal from the Russian government, which later on, took place later on.
And for what?
Well, let me see. The first ship that I was assigned to was what's called a Liberty ship. And Liberty ships were cargo vessels built very, very cheaply just to carry cargo during the war. And they were, I don't know how, there are probably 2,300 of them built. And they, believe it or not, they became so proficient at building these ships, they could turn a ship out in 1 or 2 days. Really and truly, they could build it in 1 or 2 days. Yep. And they were quite heavily armed. We had what we call a 5-inch 38 gun, which was a good-sized gun on the stern. They called the back of the ship. We had what they call a 3-inch 50 gun on the bow, which was an anti-aircraft gun. We had 8 what they call 20-millimeter anti-aircraft guns. So it was very, very well armed. And the first ship that I was assigned to was called the SS Harold L. Winslow. And it was her very first ship. She was made in Baltimore. Her very first trip. And we left New York, I believe it was in November of 1943. And we went to England. Or not to England, I beg your pardon. We went to Scotland first. And on the way over, we were shadowed by submarines, and they dropped a lot of depth charges, I remember. A lot of noise and things went on. But nobody was hurt. And we arrived in Scotland. And we did various things over there, got ready for our trip. And I think about a week later, we took off to Russia, to a port called Murmansk. And as soon as we left England, or left Scotland, I beg your pardon, as soon as we left Scotland, we'd been out for about 2 days. And then the Germans sent over what they call spotter planes. And we were in what they call in those days a convoy. Which, and to think of the convoy I was in, we had 19 ships in it. And we were protected by units of the British Royal Navy. And there were battleships out there. There were what they call cruisers and small destroyers and so forth. We had a very good protection. And about the second day out, they sent spotter planes out. The Germans did, to see what was going on and where we were, So we knew right then that something was going to happen after a while. And the Germans at that time had 3 what they call pocket battleships. And these 2 battleships were stationed in the Norwegian coastline. And the third one was called the Scharnhorst. And they sent the Scharnhorst out on Christmas Eve after our convoy to sink it, because the Scharnhorst was a battleship, and if she ever got into our convoy, she could have sunk every single ship there with her guns. We had no defense. And the To make a long story short, the British knew she was coming, and they laid a trap for her. And there was a night battle. I think it was Christmas Eve right around there sometime. And on the way to Russia in those days, or at that time of the year, it's all dark. There's no daylight. Only about 2 hours of daylight, 24. It's a dark time. And I remember going out and watching the battle on the, I could see it from where we were, the gun flashes and so forth and so on. And I could hear in the radio room, I could hear over the radio what was going on, the British giving instructions and so forth and so on. Well, long story short, they sunk the Scharnhorst, the British did. And there was a loss of, I think there was 1,400 and some men that night. And only about 12 men survived in that whole thing, in that whole battle. And the water up there was ice cold, if you were in the water more than 15 minutes, you were dead anyway, no matter what, because it was so cold. There wasn't much sense in really putting a life jacket on and swimming because you were dead. It was so cold. And I said they lost, I think it was around 1,400 men, the Germans did that night. Only about 12 or 13 men survived the whole battle. And after that was over, we proceeded on our way up to Russia. And we arrived in Russia and spent about 2 months there discharging cargo, and so forth and so on. And then eventually we came back again. So that was my biggest thing, I guess you call it. So what next?
How long did you serve in the war?
3 years, a little over 3 years.
What did you think of the war?
What did I think of the war? Well, it was just something that had to be done, I guess you would think in those days, Dan. Just something you had to do. It was a very patriotic war. Everybody was all for it. Nobody was against it that I ever heard of. And after a while, as time dragged down, you wanted to wish it was over, so you'd go home. Well, you couldn't go home until it was over with.
Did you believe the war was justified?
Oh, yes.
Did you use any weapons?
Did I use any weapons? I never did because I was a radio man. I was a communications man. We didn't carry weapons myself. No.
Were you wounded?
No. Thank goodness.
Oh, some of these questions.
Well, they're all right.
You have to come up with 100.
My grandfather was very disappointed that I wasn't wounded too.
Really?
He was an old army man. He says, Jim, could you got just a little scratch? I was on leave one time, And he said,
I do remember it.
yeah, couldn't you got just a little scratch? I said, no thanks, Grandpa.
Imagine that.
Okay, I'm sorry, dude.
What was the biggest battle you were in?
The one I just told you about.
Okay. Were you there for D-Day? During D-Day?
No, I didn't go to D-Day. I was at the time of D-Day. I was on a tanker. We were carrying oil and gasoline around the South America. We were sailing by ourselves around South America.
Did you fly in any plane?
Well, just as a passenger, not as a combatant or anything like that. I just take rides on Navy planes once in a while, if I get a chance.
What is the most memorable part of the war?
Most memorable part of the war? Yeah. Gee, that's a hard one, Dan. The most memorable part of the war. I think probably the most memorable part of the war, I think, to me, were the friends that I made when I was in the service. Not the war so much itself, but the friends that I made. And believe it or not, even today, there's still some of them alive. We still communicate. Yeah.
Isn't that nice?
When you're 17, 18 years old, you don't think too much about the war as such. It's just you're doing something. But the friends that I made during those days, the things that I learned, I think that was the most memorable thing that I remember.
What was the most devastating?
Devastating? I think the most devastating, believe it or not, Dan, I'll tell you the truth. After the war with Germany was over, they were going to send me to what they call amphibious school down in Little Creek, Virginia. And that was supposed to be for the invasion of Japan. And to me that was very devastating because I had just met my wife to be. And I didn't want to go. I didn't want to go. So, you got some room in that tape, Dan? So, what I did, to make a long story short, I fixed it so that I had to have my appendix taken out. So, they took my... You can delete this if you want to, but it's the truth. So, I went to the hospital in New York City, and they took my appendix out, believe it or not. I can't go into the whole thing. And I figured if I had my appendix taken out, they wouldn't send me to the amphibious school. I'd be able to go home and see my girlfriend again, you know, who was to be my wife later on. And I'd get a nice, what they call a nice 2, maybe 3 weeks leave. I'd be able to stay home for a while. Well, it didn't work out that way. I got a weekend to go home. That was all. And then I was sent to they sent me I went to serve on board another ship, the United States Army Transport, where we carried, at this time, the war was pretty much over, Dan. You know, pretty much, Japan was still there, but it was pretty much over. And we carried Jamaican laborers from Florida to Jamaica, back and forth. Took them back and forth. They used to come to Jamaica to work the agricultural fields in Florida. And we just took them back and forth. And that's really how I finished out the war, really. Just by sailing back and forth there.
What did you do before the war?
What did I do? I was just a student in school. I used to work in the drugstore part-time.
Did
I
you
used to shoot pool, too. I was a good pool shooter.
Listen to your answer, I want to write that down.
Did you have any previous knowledge of the war?
Previous knowledge of, well, we knew when Pearl Harbor was occurred, you know, and like that.
Do you have any family members who entered the war?
Not my own, no.
What did you do after the war?
After the war, well, the first thing I had to do was to get my high school diploma, because I didn't have a diploma at that time. And first thing I did, I got, back in those days, we had the same things you have today. We had to call it GED program. And I took that, and I went to night school. I worked, and I got my diploma, and then I finally got my regular diploma after that. And I was married, of course. And then I went to pharmacy college in Albany.
Did you have a family?
Uh-huh. At that time, I had my daughter, Christine.
Outside of the war, did you have fun?
Outside of the war?
Yes.
Outside.
After?
Well, yes, it was a good time, Dan. It was a good time. We had a good time. We did mostly, in those days we did a lot of, we worked an awful lot, Dan. Went to school an awful lot. Did a lot of working, you know. We didn't play too much. Not really.
Was this the only time you traveled?
So yeah, really.
Did you go to school before the war?
Yeah.
What schooling did you take?
Well, I guess you would call it academic subjects.
Did it help you in the war?
Not too much, no. School and I didn't get along very well, to tell you the truth, Dan, before I went in the service. When I went in the service, I realized how much I should have spent gone to school. I realized how bad I was, but it was too late then. So I had to come back after the war and go through the whole thing all over again, you know. Let that be a lesson to anybody.
Did you have... Did you have any military service prior to the war?
Well, I went to a military school in Albany called Christian Brothers Academy. I went there for a couple of years.
Did it help you at all?
No. Not really.
Did you use any weapons?
There, we used to carry rifles.
Yeah.
Were you experienced in weaponry?
No. Other than the rifle itself. I used to ride in the cavalry at that time too. They had a cavalry troop.
What were the living conditions
Where? At the school?
on the ship?
Living conditions on board the ship, very good, Dan. They were good. We ate very well. Well, we ran out of food a few times, but basically it was good, you know. It was cold, awfully cold. I remember that, very cold.
What was the weather
We
like?
sleep in our clothes.
What was the weather like?
Depending on where you were, Dan. I mean, in Russia it was freezing to death. The guns froze up because there was so much water on them and ice, and they froze right up. Couldn't even use them. And then in South America it was beautiful. You know, it was nice and hot. Depending on where you were.
Where were you when U.S. Navy won victorious
Where was I when
in the Battle of Midway?
Midway? I was going around South America on that tanker.
What bullets did you use?
And the guns?
Yes.
Well, they used to use what they called 5-inch 38s shells, 3-inch 50s, 20 millimeter. That was about it.
Did you shoot anyone?
No,
Who was your general?
I never had a general. In the Navy, you don't have generals like you do in the Army.
Who was your commanding officer?
Well, on the board the ship, I was a lieutenant. Oh my gracious!
Okay.
I think it was McCulloch back in those days. I think it was. It's hard to remember his name.
Did you lose any good friends?
Not the ship I was on, but I lost friends during the war that were in the Army.
Where were you when Japan bombed Pearl Harbor?
I was in school.
How did you feel about that?
I didn't know much about it then. I really truly didn't. I didn't know where Pearl Harbor was. I'd never heard of Pearl Harbor. I didn't know much about it. At that time, I was only 16, I think. 16 years old. 15 or 16, I forget what it was.
Did you save anyone?
No.
Did you wear a helmet?
Sometimes.
What was it like
Why?
wearing a helmet?
Uncomfortable.
Did they supply enough clothing?
Oh, yes.
Did you sleep a lot?
It wasn't that much, but all I had to do was sleep.
Did you serve in active duty?
No, when I came out, I was out.
What about active duty?
Well, that was the 3 years I was in. You consider that active duty.
What was the economy after the war?
The economy after the war? Well, at that time, due to the war, things had been produced for the last 4 or 5 years. People needed everything from cars to refrigerators to homes, houses, everything. And there was a big demand for just about anything you could make in those days. You couldn't buy things in those days. You had to wait maybe 2 years to get a car. And I know our first car, we never got a car, did we, Mom? We had to have we got an old junker used car. We got a 1938 Ford, I remember. It's all we could buy back in those days. No floor, didn't have any floor in it, but we were glad to get it, you know. But it took the country a long time to catch up with the demand, you know. And after I came out, my wife and I, we lived for a little while in the barracks in Binghamton. Couldn't find an apartment to live in, anything like that. But after a few years, the country started to produce again, you know, and people had the things that they needed, but that made the country economically very, very rich, because people had jobs, made good money. So things were good after the war. And don't forget, you had millions of veterans that went to college after the war, and what they call the GI Bill of Rights. I went to school with the GI Bill of Rights. The government paid for your tuition. That was probably the greatest thing that ever happened to this country, was the GI Bill of Rights. Because men went to college that never, ever would have been able to have gone or attended, you know, before the war. Never would have had. And men went to college, they became doctors, lawyers, dentists, all trades, and that in turn made our country great, made it what it was.
Did you start working when the war was over?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Did you get paid in the war?
Yep. Not much, but got paid.
Did you bank your money or did you spend it?
Well, I sent a lot of it home to my mother and father, I remember. I was always broke.
How much did you get?
Dan, I think when I was a third-class radioman, I think I got $73 a month. I think that's what it was.
Were you married before the war?
Nope.
How many children do you have?
Now, I have 3.
What was your main job in the service?
Radio man.
Who was the president at the time?
Franklin Delano Roosevelt.
Who was vice president?
Alvin, I think it was Barkley, wasn't it? Alvin Barkley in those days? Well, no, I beg your pardon, what am I saying? It was Truman. Because after Roosevelt died, Truman became president automatically, yeah. Yeah. Harry Truman was the president after President Roosevelt died.
Did they do a good job?
Who?
Vice president, president?
I guess, yeah, sure.
What did you think of Hitler?
Hated him. He hated him.
Do you remember any major events leading up to the war?
Major events? Not much. No, I don't. I wouldn't pay attention now.
What exactly led us to war?
What led us to war? Well, let's see now. With the war with Japan, when they bombed Pearl Harbor, that was the thing that started the whole thing. Japan bombed Pearl Harbor. Then after they did that, then Germany came into the war.
Who was president and vice president after the war?
After the war? Well, Harry Truman. President Truman was president after the war. And then I think his vice president was a man called Alvin Barkley. I could be wrong, but I think that's who it was. Of course, then after that, we had more presidents, you know.
Did you shave your head?
Nope.
How many days were you in the same clothes?
The longest I was in my clothes was about 2 weeks without changing.
Who cleaned your laundry?
We did. We had to do our own laundry.
Did you get sick at all?
No.
Did you catch any disease?
No.
Do you know anyone who lost their life from a disease?
I don't know.
Did you have sanitary systems?
Mm-hmm.
Did you take showers?
Yeah. You could take showers, but you had to be careful not to use too much water, you know. Be careful. Not too long.
The places that you went, what were they like?
Well, in Russia, it was very, very primitive. It was just wooden shacks. The women did all the work. They did all the work on loading the ships because the men were all at the front fighting, and it was just like a Wild West. I guess the best thing I could describe it as a Wild West town, I guess.
Did each place you went to hot or cold in the climate?
Well, I said before, it was freezing in Russia, and in South America it was roasted.
Would you defend your country again?
Yeah.
What did you learn from being in the war?
What did I learn? Get to Arnold. Did learn. I learned not to volunteer. I guess that's about the only thing I can say. Not to volunteer for too many things.
How long did you take America to get back to normalcy after the war?
Oh dear. To normalcy. I would say 5, 6 years, wouldn't you say, Feline?
Yeah, looks like that.
Yeah, probably.
Did everyone help each other.
Yeah, in those days they did, Dan. In those days people were very close. They helped each other.
Was
Yeah, we did have support groups they have today. You were your own support group. Yourself.
scarce.
Yes, actually the word is still scarce. It wasn't scarce, but it was difficult to obtain. You had to have... how long did ration stamps go on, Selena? Well, you had to have, still after the war, they still had ration stamps. You had to have stamps for butter and meat and things like this. But after a while, supply caught up with demand, you know.
How many lives were lost?
In American lives? I have figures, but I can't remember the answer. Thousands and thousands of men were killed. How many I can't tell you.
Did the war damage a lot of property?
Now, this country damaged a lot of property over Europe. Devastated Europe. Destroyed.
Hello.
Conditions have been imposed upon Germany after World War I. And Hitler, who came to power in Germany, was a corporal in the army, the German army during World War I.